Good. I would like to start the session by wishing Professor Alastair and Mr. Kshitij a very good morning or good afternoon as per your time zone. And we welcome you to this session. Grateful to you. I would like to start by making a brief introduction to our host today, who is Professor Alastair Nisbet. He's a lecturer in Auckland University of Technology, New Zealand. Professor Alastair has spent 14 years as a police officer in New Zealand and left the New Zealand Police to pursue qualifications at university, where he now holds degrees in business, computing, master's degree in education and law, and a PhD in cybersecurity. He is currently the director of the Cybersecurity Laboratory at the Auckland University of Technology, where he developed and has headed the Master of Information Security and Digital Forensics for several years. We welcome you, Professor Alastair.
Thank you very much.
At our end, we have a cross mix of faculty and students from computer science and from digital security from both our universities of Manav Rachna Group. I will now hand over to you to carry on further with the session. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Well, good morning, everybody. I'll start by just working through the slides, and then as we get more towards the end of the slides, I'll do just a little brief demonstration of some digital forensics for you so you know what it's all about. So I'll just check that you can see my slides at the moment.
Yes, very clearly, and your audio is also very clear.
Okay, great. Well, I'm the program leader for the Master of Information Security and Digital Forensics, commonly known just as the MISDF, and I've led this program for about 5 years now and developed the program. It's a program that needs to be developed continuously because things are changing so quickly, obviously, as I'm sure you all know. So the entry requirements for getting into the Master of Information Security and Digital Forensics at AUT is the normal entry requirements are you need a bachelor's degree in a relevant area. And in your bachelor's degree in your final year, you need a B average to be able to go straight into the master's degree. And what I've found in the last few years is that the B average is slightly tricky because there are very different universities around the world. So I do, when I get applications from students, look at which university they have come from, what their experiences are, if they've had any work experience and all that type of thing. So I would say, to be fair, it's not a hard and fast rule. I do have some leeway, but I also have an option, which I'll talk about briefly as well, if I feel that starting straight at a master's level might be difficult for some students. I get a number of applications from students with Bachelor of Engineering, and provided they have done some computing papers in their engineering degree, that is fine. I just look for some evidence of several computing papers so that they can cope with the level at masters. So B- average in your final year or equivalent. If you don't have a B- average or you don't have a background in computing, then what I will normally do is refer people to the postgrad certificate in computer and information science. And that is 4 papers or 1 semester, which is 60 points. And if the student gets a B average in those 4 papers, then they can reassign those 4 papers to the master's degree and carry on. So they simply carry on as if they were always enrolled in the master's degree, and those 4 papers count, so that it doesn't add any time to doing the master's degree. However, in those 4 papers, they must get a B average to be able to carry on to the master's. The MISDF is 180 points, 120 points is a full year, so it's 1.5 years. My understanding of the fees, I purely deal with the academic side of things, but I know that you're interested in fees. The fees, according to the website, are $37,000 for international students for 1 year, but please bear in mind that it is 1.5 years. So it is 1.5 times that amount for the full degree. Students do either 6 papers and then enroll in a thesis, a 90-point thesis, which takes 52 weeks, or they do 8 papers and then enroll in a 12-week applied research project. Applied means that it's reasonably hands-on. There tends to be something in there that is hands-on rather than being purely academic. The time is the same, it's still 1.5 years, but it's the student's choice whether they choose to do a thesis or a project. And the advice that I give students is that if you have thoughts of going on to higher studies, such as a PhD, then you are better to do the thesis, as it serves as much better grounding than doing a shorter, more practical project. So what are the employment opportunities for graduates? This is probably the most common question I get, and probably the most difficult to answer. Jobs are hard to get, so there are no guarantees when you do any qualification that a job will be waiting for you. But we've had, our students are generally pretty successful at getting jobs, even if it takes a little bit of time. From our point of view, security concerns are pervasive in most organisations. Postgraduate education in security and forensics gives up-to-date knowledge of current issues, strategies, and countermeasures in cybersecurity. And this is important because we need to keep up to date with what is happening. Things are changing so rapidly in security, less so in forensics, although it is a time of change in forensics at the moment with solid state drives. But with cybersecurity, things change quickly, and it's important for us to keep up to date so that we're teaching the very latest things that are happening out there. Security is a growing problem. It's not something that we're really getting better at. We're solving one problem and another problem is arising, which is good if you're a security graduate. And we're always looking for security professionals in New Zealand and elsewhere to do cybersecurity analysts. Seems to be the big area at the moment, people who can go into an organisation and assess security and say, what do you need to secure your organisation? That's where the jobs are at the moment. There's also jobs for computer forensic investigators, although forensic jobs are fairly rare. There's not that many of them, but having the security skills and the forensic skills is something that is very beneficial. And if you do the degree, you can look at going into either something that is more management, such as developing policies and dealing with management issues, or you can go into a more practical area where you're using practical skills in your job. So the curriculum on the master's degree, I look after 4 papers. Remember that you either do 6 papers or 8 papers. Well, 4 of them are specific for the ones that I look after. Those are the MISDF specific papers. Those 4 papers are all 6 weeks long. They're the only 4 papers we offer, as far as I know, in the whole of the School of Computing that are 6 weeks long, and they're taught in the evening at 6 p.m. at night because we have a lot of people who work, and the 6 p.m. lectures and labs seem to suit people. Those 4 papers are Cybercrime and Cybersecurity, which starts at the beginning of the year for 6 weeks, followed by Digital Forensics Tools and Techniques, which is just about to finish next week. That's the one I'm teaching at the moment. The beginning of semester 2 in July, we'll have Network Security and Forensics, followed by Cryptography and Cryptanalysis. And then the 2 other core papers that students must also do are Information Security and Research Methods to prepare them for their research, such as the thesis or the project. So cybercrime and cybersecurity, it has very much a focus on cybersecurity rather than on forensics. We don't get into the forensics in that paper. I've kept it very much to cybersecurity. It's a more management focused paper, so it's not that practical. We don't have practical labs for it. The assignments tend to be more academic, more looking at current issues and writing about current issues. And we look at malware and network intrusions, as well as things like security policies and developing security policies for organisations. And we study a little bit of law as well. This is followed by Digital Forensics Tools and Techniques. This very much has a focus on forensics and only forensics rather than cybersecurity. It's a much more technical or practical paper where the labs form a big part of what you study. Very hands-on. We use Kali Linux, which we've found is a very good tool for using forensic and cybersecurity tools, and obviously being Linux, it is free as well, which is a big bonus. But in the dedicated lab we have at AUT, we also have other software, including Encase, which is very well known and respected forensic software used by many organisations around the world, such as the New Zealand Police and PricewaterhouseCoopers here in New Zealand use it, etc. The assignment for digital tools, which the students have just completed and handed in on Friday, involves solving a crime. and they recovered deleted files and cracked passwords and cracked hashes and pieced together all the evidence from a recovered USB stick and develop all the forensic skills in that sort of area for running programs and seeing what they do and getting into files, etc. So it's quite a fun assignment while developing some good practical skills. Network security and forensics focuses much more on networks, including web browsers. It's a bit of a mix of academic and some technical hands-on practicals as well. We examine a couple of real cases in the United States, the Casey Anthony murder trial, which you may have heard of in 2009, and the Chandra Levy disappearance, who was the runner who went missing in a park in New York. We examine those cases to see what was done in those cases from a digital forensics perspective, what mistakes were made, because there were mistakes made in both cases. In one case, Casey Anthony was acquitted, and we'll never know whether, if the forensics were done correctly in the first place, whether she would have been convicted, but it may have made a difference. And in the case of Chandra Levy, she may have been discovered in the park a lot earlier. It took a year to discover her body, and there was evidence there which could have greatly assisted, but there was some mistakes made. We then look at the best practices to recover and analyse the evidence, what should have been done, and how you would do it if you were a forensic investigator. We also look at some hands-on packet analysis, and we crack wireless networks and that sort of thing, WEP and WPA, monitor networks, decrypt packets, and those sorts of things as well, as far as the practical side goes. And then finally, the fourth paper is towards the end of the year. That's cryptography and cryptanalysis. We look at the logic of the crypto systems more than really the mathematical side of the crypto systems. We use the Zodiac killers. You might remember the Zodiac killer from the 60s in San Francisco, and he sent encrypted letters to the police and the newspapers, and we look at how were they cracked. One of them still hasn't been cracked at all. One has been partially cracked, and one was cracked quite early on. So we examine from a real perspective, how are these cryptography decoded, and how were the messages read, and we use that in some other examples. We look at cryptographic algorithms, AES, DES, triple DES, RSA, and other cryptographic algorithms. We go a little bit more in depth with passwords and hashes and the latest developments in those areas. There are some, but it tends to be more probability and the logic, more of the maths, rather than getting into the hardcore maths of things. So it's not a focus on the maths, but rather the logic. And I kind of make that point a little bit because sometimes I find when I mention maths, students tend to head the other way. So if you're not a mathematician, you don't need to be a mathematician to do that paper. So in practice, the mix of theory and practical curriculum means that different students' abilities come to the fore. Some students are very good at management, some students are very good at hands-on. There is really something there for everybody, and they can excel in their particular area. The practical skills, especially for forensic, are taught from the no previous knowledge perspective. So although a sound knowledge of general computing is desirable, I assume that not one student in the class has ever done any forensics before. So we start from the very basics of forensics and Kali Linux, and we work through to developing quite good skills in those areas. So what has happened worldwide in cybersecurity? Well, Stuxnet really changed everything in 2009. That was really the seminal moment where we started looking at malware differently. Prior to that, malware was a little bit of a nuisance, or somebody was doing something to try and get a little bit of money. But now with Stuxnet, we see that this can actually cause real damage to hardware in factories if it's not controlled. It was different because it was targeted. It targeted the Natanz nuclear facility in Iran. This was unusual. A lot of malware doesn't have a specific target. It's sent out there in the wild and it just looks for vulnerabilities, but this was targeted just to the Natanz facility and would only do damage to the Natanz facility. It was possibly written by two nations collaborating. We don't know for sure, but this is unusual. Firstly, that nations would write malware. They certainly write other things, but malware, and that two nations would collaborate together. So this has changed things as well. It used multiple 0 days and stolen digital certificates. So as you're probably aware, 0 days means that they are unknown vulnerabilities. There have been 0 days to fix these problems. And stolen digital certificates, so when the program, the malware went to run, it appeared to have a genuine digital certificate that was signed that allowed it to run without raising any red flags. And it was unusual because it caused deliberate damage, and not just damage to software or files, but caused damage to centrifuges, which are hardware devices, and this was unusual as well. Since Stuxnet, we've seen other similar malware that is destructive and targeted, such as Flame and Dooku and Shamu. COVID-19, I'm a little bit surprised anyway to see that we haven't seen more attacks during the COVID-19 issues we've had in the last few months. And I thought about why is this? Why have things gone a little bit quiet? Well, possibly because so many businesses are shut down. There simply are fewer targets to attack. And also that people have other concerns at the moment. But I think once this is over and we rebound back from the COVID-19, I think next year and probably later in next year, we're going to see a real resurgence of malware attacks and cyber crimes. And we need to be ready for that. We need the graduates who are there ready to combat that. So what is the difference between cybersecurity and forensics? Well, cybersecurity, you can think of it as an umbrella term and incorporates a whole lot of different areas. And forensics is just one part of that area under the umbrella. Many countries now have formal cybersecurity strategies. New Zealand's first cybersecurity strategy was in 2012. But who advises on how we implement these strategies? If you look at a lot of these early strategies, including the New Zealand one, they were very general. In 2012, the government was saying we need to raise awareness of the issues, but that's really as far as they went. They didn't say how we raise awareness and what do we do with this new awareness that we have. So we need people who really understand these issues, who can advise governments and government departments and businesses of what does this all mean and what do we actually do. It's nice to talk about these issues, but at some stage we have to do something about it, and we have to have the skills to be able to do something about it. So these businesses and organisations are looking for guidance. They're looking for people who can do auditing and checking their cybersecurity and telling them what they need to beef up their cybersecurity. We need compliance with different standards, ISO standards and that type of thing. Are we complying with those standards? How do we know if we're complying with those standards? And from an insurance point of view, if there is a cyber attack, and this is an area that's been quite current at the moment being looked at, is insurance. How do you insure against a cyber attack, and what is fair for an insurance company to pay out in the event of a cyber attack? So we need people who can be experts in these areas to say, this is the amount of damage that has been done, and this is what needs to be spent to stop this happening again. In New Zealand's new cybersecurity strategy of 2020, there's an interesting part of a sentence that says, these principles acknowledge that cybersecurity is not a problem that the government can fix. So we cannot rely on the governments to solve the cybersecurity problems. I'm sure they would love to, but they don't have the resources to be able to do that. We need to rely on industry, and we need to rely on academics, and we need to rely on students doing research. Government needs experts, companies need experts, but even the smaller businesses need experts as well. PricewaterhouseCoopers did a survey a couple of years ago. They found that 59% of the chief executive officers agree that there is increasing pressure to hold individuals accountable for the losses. This is a shift we've seen in the last few years as well, whereas previously the companies and organisations would pay for the losses. Now we're looking at who is responsible. Can we name the person whose job it was to ensure that we were secure against this attack? And if they haven't done their job, they may have to reimburse us. 46% of businesses have performed a cybersecurity assessment, but that means that 54% of businesses have never performed a cybersecurity assessment. And 46% spent the same or more on investigating a loss than on how much that loss actually cost the company. And this is one of the reasons why we see companies not investigating these cyber attacks, is because it's so expensive to do at the moment and so difficult to do because we have a lack of personnel who are scared, who are skilled enough to do that. And very briefly, the most common sort of attacks that we are seeing: 36% malware, 33% phishing, that's still a big attack, 13% network scanning, 10% unsure. And I make the comment there, where is the forensic specialist if we're unsure of how the attack happened or what the attack actually did? We need the forensic specialist to step in at this point and to examine the files and our network, etc., and tell us what happened. What did we lose? What was looked at? What was stolen? What was deleted? 8% of attacks are brute force attacks, and generally brute force attacks are reasonably easy to come up with a policy, password policy, a login policy that will negate a brute force attack. But 8%, so that's somewhere around about 1 in 12.5 attacks, are still brute force attacks. And 7% are man in the middle. So the point is that being ready for these attacks is absolutely vital, and that's where you come in. We need to be able to respond quickly. We need to be able to stop the attack. We need to be able to forensically investigate the attack. If you can only do that if you have access to a forensic expert, and there's not that many forensic experts out there. And we need to increase security by using the knowledge of the attack vectors from the forensic investigator's report. So in this way, the forensics feeds back into the cybersecurity, so we can beef up our cybersecurity and make our systems much more secure, because the attack can actually help us do that if we understand the attack. Almost all attacks are preventable. Organizations need skilled personnel, and skilled personnel are those that have knowledge, skills, and communication skills as well, which are vital. And this is where the new graduates come in. New graduates are experts by their qualifications, such as in the Master of Information Security and Digital Forensics, and by their experience. What have they done with that degree? You learn by doing, by reading, and by discussing with others. And so we try to cover all of that in the master's degree. So on more to forensics. This is the forensics life cycle, and you'll see that we begin with evidence collection, evidence preservation, followed by evidence analysis, and finally writing a report about what we found. And this is exactly what the students have been doing in the Digital Forensics Tools and Techniques course that they are just about to complete. Forensics tends to be very technical. So in cybersecurity, we have a lot of policies and guidelines and management issues. Forensics tends to be something bad has happened and now we need to figure out what it is. So it tends inevitably to be a very hands-on practical area. Very few, if any, of the students that I see in the classroom in the master's degree have ever done any forensics before. Forensics requires understanding, so you can't just learn to click on a menu, etc. And this is one of the reasons I quite like Linux for forensics, is because inevitably it forces students to really understand what is going on at a lower level. It feeds back into cybersecurity to increase our security. And at AUT, we use Encase and Kali Linux. Now, if you wanted to buy Encase, it's about 40,000 New Zealand dollars, or about 1 year's average salary, to get a license for the year for Encase. So it's not practical to have Encase yourself or Encase in many businesses. And so that is why there's been a shift to using Linux, because everybody can use Linux, obviously. So Linux is very powerful, and it does everything that the big, expensive corporate software like Encase or FTK can do. Linux can be used at home, and this has been a real bonus over this time with students learning online. They have been using Linux at home, downloading Kali, installing it and running it. Other tools can be easily installed in Linux if you want to install a tool, and many of you will have done that. apt-get install and the name of the tool, and within a couple of minutes you've got the tool up and running. And I'm going to give you just a brief demonstration of the sort of thing we do in the class. It's a fairly basic demonstration, but if you haven't seen Kali before, or you haven't seen Linux before, you might find this of some interest. So I'll just change my screen to my Kali screen. And can you tell me if you can see the Kali screen?
Yes, we can, Alastair.
You can. Okay, thank you. Just checking. That would be a disaster. So I've got this set up, and I'll tell you the setup that I've got. I'm running a Windows 10 machine with a VirtualBox and Kali Linux 2020, the latest version, installed in the VirtualBox. It's all running quite nicely. I have a 4 GB USB stick, and that is put into the USB port on the computer. And I have made a partition of 9.4 megabytes, and there it is there. I put some files onto that partition, and you'll see that I've then deleted the files. So you'll see that there are no files visible on that USB stick. So what I'm going to give a demonstration of is just recovering those deleted files, and then we're going to have a closer look at one of those files. So the first thing I'm going to do is just check what the stick is called in Linux with the fdisk command. So it's fdisk -L. And you'll see there that I've got an 80 gigabyte VirtualBox hard disk mounted as SDA. And I've got SDB, which is my 4 gigabyte USB stick. And down the bottom there, you'll see that it's mounted as, or not mounted, listed as device SDB1, and it is 9 megabytes. So that's the one that I'm going to image, and I'll image that with the DD command. So DD, my input file is going to be /device/SDB1, and my output file is going to be, I'll save it to the desktop, so I'll put desktop, and it is going to be, say, my files.dd, and just a couple of other switches in case something goes wrong, just ignore those errors. Okay, and you'll see how quick it is to create an image of that 9 gigabyte partition, which is why I use these very small partitions. And I've got a new file on my desktop there, my files.dd, and that is effectively a bit-by-bit, 01 bit-by-bit copy of the partition. So I'm now ready to recover the files from that partition, and I'm going to use a very simple command called foremost. And -I for input is going to be desktop. And my files.dd, and -O for the output. I'm just going to simply save it to the desktop in a folder called my files. And you'll see how quickly it does that, and it creates a new folder. And hopefully, if things have gone right, in that folder will be those deleted files that were on that USB stick before I deleted them. So Foremost very nicely puts it into some folders for me, and you'll see that there's a docx file there, and you'll see that there's a JPEG, and there's somebody very, very happy to be recovered. And we have some other pictures, PNG pictures, and we have a couple of PDFs as well. You'll notice that Foremost doesn't keep the original file name, it gives the file name with a long number. So I'm just going to rename that to make it a bit easier. So I'll just call it my PDF.pdf, and I'll copy that to my desktop, and I'll try opening it. But as you'll see, there's a bit of a problem because it's got a password on it, so I can't open my PDF. And this is what the students have to do to be able to solve their crime. They recover some files, but they can't open them because they're either got a hash value they need to put in, or they have to put a password in. So I'll use another command and try to see if I can crack that password. So I'll just clear my screen with clear, and then I'll use PDF crack, which is very simple to use, and -F for the file name. It's on the desktop, and it's called my PDF.pdf. And you'll see it starts cracking, and very quickly it manages to crack the password, and we can see that the password is cat. I chose a nice short password that was going to crack very quickly. If it was 4 characters, it would be longer than that, obviously, probably 62 times longer, but I'll leave you to work that out. So I'll try opening that again, and it's asking me for the password, and I put in the password cat that we've just cracked, and sure enough, I managed to open the password. So that's just a very brief demonstration of the sort of things that the students are learning. That is the fairly basic level, but we learn a lot of those sorts of things. It's quite good fun, but also you're learning vital skills as you go in a fairly fun environment. So I'll head back to the slides just to finish off. I'll just check you can see the slides. Are they visible? I'll assume they are. So in summary, cybercrime is growing. It's a growing problem. And for us, really, this is, in a way, it's what we want. We don't like cybercrime, but if we're going to be graduates in the area of cybercrime, this is a good thing for us. Their jobs are going to be there, and there's going to be more of them. Cybercrime is a problem that will never be solved. Whatever area we do maybe solve, we find more problems arising. There's currently a very big demand for new graduates who can do cybercrime and forensic skills. Forensics is a smaller area, but it's a vital area. When you need forensics, you really need it. Security and forensics is becoming more difficult. Security is becoming more difficult. Forensics is facing solid state drives, mobile phones with encryption, that type of thing. And we need highly skilled graduates just like yourselves out there to help us combat the cybercrime and forensics problem. So thank you very much for listening to that. I hope that's given you a good overview of the MISDF problem and the sorts of things we do on the MISDF, and I'd like to take any questions if you have any.
Thanks a lot, Alastair. I can see there's one question in the chat window, and it says, what are your views with regards to the cybersecurity programs offered by the EC Council?
I'm not that familiar with those programs, so I would assume that they are more practical based, but probably quite different than the one offered at AUT. At AUT, we try to cover the management and the practical in equal measures, and the cybersecurity and the forensics. Currently, cybersecurity perhaps 60% and forensics 40%, but I'd imagine it's quite different than what the EC are offering. Any other questions at all?
Got one more. How would you ensure reliability of the security?
Oh, that's a big question, isn't it? Reliability. Well, the problem with security is it is such a massive area, and this is one of the problems with being a cybersecurity expert, as some people are labelled. The reality is that cybersecurity is so big and so complex that I don't think anybody can really be a true expert in all areas of cybersecurity. It is simply just too big and too complex and developing all the time. How do you ensure reliability? You do the best you can. You look at what the standards are, you look at what the policies are, and you do the best to comply with those standards and policies and understand them and have people around you who understand them, who can assist, but that's the best that you can do.
I'll make a call and call you back.
Got another question here. So which part has the most scope in the future, network penetration or web app penetration testing?
They're both very, very topical, and both have problems that are not going to go away. I would say it's really whatever area you're interested in. There's going to be plenty of opportunity in both areas. Networks, of course, has become such a huge area because of the internet, because all our networks are connected to the internet. So that's always a good area, but web pages are not going anywhere either. So I think really in equal measures, and there's plenty of opportunity out there for whichever area you choose to go into.
I've got another question here talking about CTF, capture the flags to gain experience.
Oh, yes. Yep, certainly good fun and develops good skills and is very challenging, and something that is very worthwhile if you want to develop your skills in a fun way as well, definitely.
For the question here, how to get into AUT and what is the future through this university? I can answer the first part of it, how to get into AUT. You can get in touch with Mr. Colonel Girish, and he will give you our details. You can get in touch with us and we'll be more than happy to help you get into AUT. We'll be happy to help you with the admissions and any course-related information. Alastair, would you want to tell them what is the future through the university?
AUT is a very well-respected university. It's the Auckland University of Technology, so our focus is very much on technology, and especially in the computing programs we focus on technology. I think our point of difference is probably that we have more practical and hands-on than many of the other universities, as well as doing the upper level academic work. But there is a lot of opportunity at AUT to do the practical side as well, probably more so than the other universities.
what is the better platform for exploit writing C, C++, or Python?
I think Python is probably the way to go because it's quite easy to use and pretty universal, but that's probably more a personal view than an objective view. So I hope you're not going to be writing any exploits, but either or really. I'm sorry, that's not a very definitive answer, is it? But all these platforms have their uses.
Any other question that anybody has that you want us to answer?
Well, I'm certainly happy to give you any more information if you would like it, or any more information on the content of the courses, etc. So I'll leave that with your university, but if you do want information, I'm certainly happy to provide anything.
I think there are no more questions.
Okay.
So thank you very much, Professor Alastair, for your very informative session. And this demonstration which you conducted was really an eye-opener. All of us from Manarachna are grateful to you for taking this time out to take this session for all of us. We wish you a wonderful day ahead. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Goodbye.